We spoke about, and y'all mention all the time. I don't know why I keep saying y'all all the time.
Y'all? Like, are we in the South?
You've been hanging around that you keep saying y'all. And it's not about us, right, as hospice workers. So it would be I would think it'd be very strange for a hospice nurse to be like, tell me more. What is it? Good luck surviving in nursing for a long period of time. You won't. You won't.
I'm in the fucking mountains, Julie.
You guys,
darling.
I spend a shit ton of money on really good internet.
Nurse Julie, Nurse Penny.
Perfect.
Round 3 for Julie, round 2 for Penny. So thank you both so much for being here. This is exciting.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us. We love you, David.
The internet right now.
I love your sign. I'm like so jealous of your sign.
You know,
dead
you should,
in neon.
I'm going to tell you where I got this, because they actually did a really good job. Just in case y'all want a neon sign of saying something with your names, I'm going to give you the plug, so don't worry. But there's one thing I actually wanted to start off. I mean, obviously everyone knows that you both, death is a big part of your lives professionally, and of course your own personal experiences. And I was curious, clearly you both are very educational on it and talk about it all the time. Whoever wants to start first, but my question is, what about death, outside of the fact that you do it professionally, or maybe it blends together? Like, why do you feel it's so important to educate and to discuss? Like, do you each have your own personal reasons for that?
So I grew up with not a lot of exposure to death, and I ended up having death anxiety. And as I became a hospice nurse and started watching people dying and how families responded to that, I could see that same anxiety and fear when they were seeing things in their person that they were not expecting to see. And so I just think it's really important to normalize death and dying. It's no secret that none of us are going to be able to avoid it. It's going to happen to all of us in the end. And if people are prepared for that, they can just have a better experience when they're dealing with somebody dying or their own death. And it can also really help to alleviate that anxiety and fear that we have around death, because it's so unknown and so taboo. We don't want to talk about it, like somehow that is going to make it happen or make it happen faster. And so, what was the question? Oh, I'm just kidding.
Julie, before you hit us with your response, and maybe this could kind of bounce off each other here, but Penny, if you're saying you had anxiety towards it, what got you to overcome that and become so confident talking about it? Was just specifically your career as a hospice nurse?
Yeah, I mean, it started with my career being a hospice nurse. Seeing people visioning at the end of life was very helpful to me, because I had no religious upbringing, so I had no concept of afterlife. So seeing people visioning their deceased loved ones was something that really made me think, oh, there could be something after this. But also just being around it so much and learning about it and talking about it, it just kind of seemed, one, less scary, but also, just the acceptance of the inevitability really helps. I think if people can get to a place where they just accept it, it's going to happen. You don't have to like it, but you have to accept it, because there is no other choice. And once you accept it, it kind of takes the steam out of it. Like you can just concentrate on living your life instead of perseverating on, I'm going to die someday. What's that going to be like? It's just easier to enjoy life if you're not just thinking about fucking dying all the time.
Perseverating. I'm going to have to look that up later, but
I love that.
It's one of my favorites. I love that word.
I love that word, perseverating. I was thinking the same
just
thing.
Nodding up, perseverating. Like, got it. Okay, no, I love that.
Thank you for the reminder.
Julian, what about you? What is the whole? Obviously, you put yourself out there already, but what about death makes it so important to you?
Yeah, I mean, Penny really hit the nail on the head. I think we all can say the things Penny and I are saying. Like, people can understand the concept of, like, you have to accept that you're dying so you can live a better life. Like, I think people can kind of easily be like, oh, of course, But what I found in watching it all the time, probably took me like a couple of years being a hospice nurse, watching people death being around me a lot for a couple of years. where I really saw it play. Like it was really in action. It was like the people who were willing to talk about it, who were willing to prepare themselves, who were willing to educate themselves. I truly could see how they could live better and die better. Like it was very obvious. And it takes a while to start seeing that. You have to be a nurse for a while, right? So like in the ICU, I learned a lot of different things and you see patterns all the time. And then as a hospice nurse, you learn a lot of different things and you see patterns all the time. And the big pattern that I blatantly saw was like the concept that we all might say and want to do, but the people who actually did it really did live better and die better. And what I found was like the way they did it was by educating themselves. People who are willing to listen to what to expect, what their death will likely be like-ish. We have an idea-ish, especially with specific diseases. So I felt like that was really profound. That was really profound for me to see that people really who are willing to accept and learn and understand about what they're really going to be going through seem to live better and die better.
What better place to learn than from you two and to your experience? I mentioned, I briefly haven't spoke too publicly about it, but when I recently had a scare with my mom where she almost died, kind of did medically die, if you will. Even if I talk about it all the time, or if people talk about it, it's sometimes you just don't know until you go through it sometimes. So it's part of that. The education process is so important, but even with that education process, when you're in the room experiencing it firsthand, it's just like a different punch to the face. So is there anything that, you mentioned patterns, Julie, is there anything that in regards to patterns that you would think is it like a hospice 101 towards the end of life that you either let people know or you would want to let people know regardless of how someone's dying?
The hospice 101, I always try to do is specifically talk about just talking about death and dying, talking about, I do try to soften it up depending on who I'm talking to, because you kind of have to read the room. And I call it like everyone has an end of life journey. We specifically know that you are on yours right now. You're on hospice. This is an end of life journey. Here is what yours would likely look like. And to me, and I think Penny and I have talked about this, but like the actively dying phase, which is the very last phase of life, most people look the same no matter what you're dying from. But other specific diseases will have things that may happen to them before that I also like to educate about. And sorry if you hear that truck beeping in the back. I don't know if you do or not, but it is Wednesday.
It is Wednesday. Yeah.
And then the last thing I'll add that I usually talk about is like the actual hospice benefit. Like Medicare provides hospice as a hospice benefit, and you get certain things and you don't get certain things. And people have tons of misconceptions about what they will receive, what they won't receive, what they can do, what they can't do. So my visit with them during an admission is usually very long because we've got a lot to cover. I
want to ask you in relation, because Julie just covered a lot, a lot of the more, I don't want to say logistics of it, but as a hospice nurse, you're seeing the physicality of dying, obviously, in that whole process. But there's also, of course, with losing someone, is the grief process. Have you seen any? I mean, this is a two-part question, perhaps. I'm sure you've seen hysteria in some capacity of how people react differently to losing a loved one, which is understandable. Have you noticed any like really, I don't want to say wrong ways, but some of the worst ways some people have handled it, that you've took something from that in regards to how maybe there are better modalities to handling grief in regards to death?
Yeah, absolutely. I've seen that. What immediately comes to mind for me is a man he was living with his mom, and he was very unrealistic about her poor health status. He really didn't see how badly she was doing, and he was encouraging her to get up and walk and go garden and do this and do that, and she fell and she broke her hip. And then she was really down for the count and on hospice. And he was just not able to really care for her in the way that she needed to be cared for, because he just couldn't accept how really bad off she was. And it got to the point where he was being neglectful in his reticence to medicate her for pain. She was in so much pain. And rather than medicate her for pain, he just stopped repositioning her, and she ended up getting a big bed sore. And so then his sisters had to step in, and they actually went to court and got custodial guardianship of her and a restraining order against him. Well, the restraining order didn't come right away. First, they moved her into a nursing home because he did live in the same house with her. And, he was just badgering the staff, and he was assaultive, verbally with them and not wanting them to give her medication. And they finally kicked him out, and the sisters were pursuing a restraining order. And I felt terrible for him, and but it was his own undoing. He did it to himself. And I'll never forget standing outside of the facility with him, and she was now actively dying. She was dying, and he couldn't go see her, and he was in tears. He wanted to go see her. And I just remember he was this big guy in a black leather jacket, and I just remember like putting my hands on his shoulders and looking him in the eye and saying, "She is dying, and you cannot go be with her if you don't stop doing what you're doing. You cannot be getting in the way of the nurses doing their job. You can't be telling them what to do." And he finally agreed to that, and he was finally able to go in there and be with her. And then she was like one of these ones too, where she was really lingering, and probably because that relationship, he was the baby of the family. I saw kind of a lot of my brother and my sister and I a little bit in that situation. My brother would never be like that with staff, but just, I felt for him because he was the baby and he was attached to the mom, and I felt for him, and he was able to be with her, and she was able to finally die, and he was there. But what did I take from that? People sometimes when they're grieving, they just act in ways that is not their character. And you really have to find some compassion within yourself sometimes. Sometimes it's impossible. Sometimes people are just, it's unacceptable the way that they're acting, and they just can't be there, and that's all there is to it. But you also have to be able to sometimes just kind of like rise above and kind of have a different view of the situation and understand that their dynamic, one, has probably already been existing for a long time before we came into the picture, but also that grief can really wreck people. It can really make people behave in ways that they would never, ever consider if they weren't in such profound, overwhelming
I hate to,
grief.
I don't like to phrase a question in negative context. Right? I said, what are some of the worst? But I think the way you wrapped it up is the purpose of the question, because you kind of wrapped it up with some lessons at the end, especially how everyone handles it so differently. And there's so many variables. You're the baby of the family, the oldest, like even within siblings, they would handle it so differently. So I feel like y'all have the first glance of the dying process and the grieving process all at once. And you're almost like a fly in the wall, a professional fly on the wall, if you will. Julie, is there anything that comes to mind with like kind of the same situation where if you've, pulled something from other people's grief experience, whether good or bad?
I was just going to say, since Penny gave a really great example of, when grief can really create a negative situation, which it sounds like it eventually became an okay one. But I have seen that too, where you kind of have to level with people eventually, because it's like, listen, this is it. You either get on board or you're out of here because you're creating such havoc. But because of that, but I've also seen the other side. And I think seeing those profound experiences on the other way, where people have accepted that they were dying, accepted that their loved one was dying, and then because of that, I got to witness these last breaths where the family is all around, everyone's saying sweet and wonderful things, like one big room of like love and like grace and joy. And that has been so profound. Those moments for me have been the most profound, because when you see moments like that and you can get chills and goosebumps and you're like, oh, whoa, that was, I don't know how to explain it except for like, I could feel the love literally. So then you have those moments where you're like, this is how we want them. Not every death can go like that, right? Because not every family dynamic is the same. And, it just depends. But if we can get people there, it can be such a beautiful experience. It doesn't, like Penny and I are just constantly trying to say, like, death doesn't have to be this scary, traumatic thing. It can still be it can be very, very sad and also profound and sacred at the same time. So I think both things teach me things, like the bad scenario, the good scenario. But when there's like a bunch of love in the room and it's like this sacred, peaceful, accepted death, that is like, that's how I want to do it. If I get a chance to be able to do it like that, that is how I want to go. I want to go like that, and that's
the positive affirmation. The positive affirmation, like you see what you don't want to do, but then you also see what you do want to do. And, when you put it in the positive, it even makes it more so that you want it to be that way. You want it to be beautiful. And, like Julie said, I always say there's going to be sadness. It's always going to be sad, but it doesn't have to be scary. And that's what really inhibits people from being able to truly be with their dying person, not just physically, which it does definitely inhibit. Some people are like, I can't even see them. They don't look like, somebody just DM'd me recently and said, my grandmother is dying and I feel so bad. I just can't be with her. I can't physically be with her and see her like that, but also like being emotionally disconnected as well, like being in the room, but not knowing how to be with the person because they're unresponsive. They look different, And so I think it's really important when we can encourage people to say, to say to them, that's still your person. And even though they look different, and it's because they're not living, they're dying, but so they look different, but they're still here now and they can hear you and be with them just like you would any other time.
What is your prescription? Either of you, if you want to call your names out, I'll pick it out of a hat, but what is your personal prescription? And of course, I feel like it's rarely one shoe fits all, but in your personal mantra and beliefs, start with Julie, how do you accept all this? Like if you even have to put yourself in that situation, because I feel like when you're in this situation, it's much harder to see the lessons or see the gifts and stay calm, of course, but how do you personally believe, how would you do it if you were in that situation, not as a hospice nurse, if you were that person as a family member dealing with that shit?
Yeah, it's there's not one way, and I do think it's more difficult for people who've lived a life of resistance in general. Like, I think so many people, including myself, resist bad feelings, quote unquote bad feelings, resist scary, so I think it's very individualized, but in general, the way I try to get to people from my end as a hospice nurse is through education, the start of education. Like, I'm not a counselor. I'm not a grief counselor. I'm not a chaplain. I'm not someone who is I love the emotional side of things and I love talking about it, but that's not my skill set. My skill set is to be a nurse and to educate. So the way I do it on my end is through education to try to help them understand what's literally physically happening so they can understand it and then hopefully start getting some acceptance around it. So that's how. And then also as a hospice nurse, I do just ask uncomfortable questions. I don't think everyone, I will ask like point blank uncomfortable questions to get people understanding that like I'm going to go there and it's okay. And most of the time that goes over well. Every once in a while it does not, but most of the time people are like, oh, okay, we're going to go there. We're waiting for someone to do it,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've asked those questions too. Like, has anybody told you how soon they think he's going to die? Like getting right down to it when you have to, because that's going to happen soon. And so you really have to like go there with people sometimes in order to be able to hopefully get them to where they need to be, or even telling somebody, that they're dying right now. Mm-hmm. So if you want to climb on the bed next to them or hold their hand, now's the time. They're dying right now. It's also different for us because it's not our family who's dying.
Yeah.
So we are able to see the forest through the trees where they're not. we're looking at it from a completely different perspective. Now, when it's our people, that's a different story. And I can tell you that when my dad died, I'd been a hospice nurse for 5 years. And when the hospice nurse came to give us our consult, I could have just been, I may as well have known nothing, because I felt like everything she was saying to me, I'd never heard before, even though I'd said it to hundreds and hundreds of patients, but it's different when it's your own person. Now, in my dad's case, I just feel very lucky that my whole family, I wouldn't say we're death positive. We never really were death positive. My mom told me when I was a kid that grandpa fell asleep and was never going to wake up again. That was her explanation of death. So clearly we weren't a death informed household. But when we all recognized that my dad was dying, we embraced the time that we had with him. We each spent time with him. We told him what he meant to us. We had no idea that he was going to die as fast as he did. He was literally on hospice for less than 12 hours. We went out and got him his favorite food. We went out and got him a big Starbucks cup of coffee because he had been on all kinds of restricted diets. And we just jumped into action and did those things for him almost just automatically, or like what do you call them? Anyway, we just, automatrons, I don't know, robots going to the all-you-can-eat buffet, getting the food for dad. The plan was to take him home the next day, and we had no idea that he was going to die that night, and he did. And then our grief was overwhelming, but we processed it all together like a family. So that's the only, and my kids who were teenagers at the time remember that. We've talked about it recently. They look at that time as it was sad because grandpa died, but it was such a good time for them because we were all together as a family and we grieved together. And so it was really special. So that's the one experience that I can draw from, professionally, my personal experience to be able to inform how I talk with people about grief. But I'm like Julie, it's not my area of expertise. I know some stuff about grief and anticipatory grief, but mostly it's education. Through education that I think we're able to help people
that makes
the
a lot of
most.
sense. The more you were both were speaking about it, I guess, and especially your example, Penny, you're saying you were a hospice nurse for 5 years, experiencing your own loss, and you still felt like what the hell? Excuse my language. What the fuck am I doing exactly? And I think that's part of it, but also back to what you both are saying, it makes sense to educate. If people are learning from you both about the process, it kind of armors you with more bullets in your chamber for when the time comes. And it's not going to be perfected when that time comes, but it's like, oh, I remember what Nurse Julie told me, and this is normal. Because like I said, again, back to my personal experience, I want to talk about it. We don't have to get into it, but it was like, I didn't know if this was normal. And but then I pulled back some things even y'all have mentioned. It was like, oh no, this is normal. And I wouldn't have stayed as calm if I didn't have that information from either of you.
If you look at it like, when a person is dying, there are so many moving parts. There are so many different emotions and feelings. I mean, the grief process in and of itself has all kinds of feelings that are attached to it. Sadness, anger, denial, bargaining, all of the things. And then anticipatory grief, waiting for someone to die. And then they die and you feel guilty because you were wishing that they would die faster. And there's like all these different moving parts. And if you can take some of those things out of the equation, so they don't have to worry about those things anymore, like the fact that their feet are purple, or that they have a death rattle, or that their breathing is strange, or that they're sleeping more, or that they don't want to eat, or they can't swallow. Like if you can take those things that are normal out of the equation of things that people are worrying about when their person is dying, there are less things for them to have to focus on. So I think it makes it easier for them to process those grief feelings when they can let go of some of the other things that are disturbing to them or troubling to them.
We love agreeing, but I want to try to get y'all to disagree soon.
Exactly.
I do want to transition. I know we spoke about this before. I just want to bring another thing up, if y'all don't mind. We spoke about, and y'all mention all the time. I don't know why I keep saying y'all all the time. What's going on right now? Yeah.
I was just
y'all. Like, are we in the South?
Hanging around that you keep saying y'all. Like, y'all? I know you're from New York. Get
Julie, I saw in your face.
Out of the South.
Felt like the energy blasting from your eyeballs.
I was like, why does he keep saying y'all?
I have
Who
been
has he
listening
been
to this dude
playing around?
Morgan Wallen. I don't know if I'm butchering that. Like, I'm trying to get into country a little bit, but that's not. I've been saying this before. I'm just more concerned as to why I'm saying it so many times in this friggin' podcast right now. Okay. Anyway, transitioning. You two have spoke about visioning quite a bit, and I know we've spoke about it on this podcast. But to kind of, I want to ask you: I'm not asking if you believe in it, but was there any experience that stood out the most, that was most proof worthy, or is it just the fact that it's so regular and it's so common that makes it more susceptible to knowing that it's real? Is that too much of a weird ask? Did I ask that weirdly?
No, it's not. I've had some proof-worthy experiences, but it's interesting. Julie and I have talked about this before, that when people are visioning, we don't have a whole lot of conversation with them about what's happening. We just kind of watch what's unfolding. We don't really get in the way of that. And so we're not like, who are you seeing? What are they telling you? And I did have a couple of experiences like that, which were the ones that really affirmed to me that people see what they're saying that they're seeing. But we witness it a lot, but it's kind of so commonplace in a way that it's not, I don't know, it's not as profound each time we see it, or, it's very profound, of course, but, like I've only had a handful of experiences where my patient told me what they were seeing, because most of the time when they were doing it, I just observed what I knew that that's what was happening. I didn't like press them for who they were talking to, because I had already seen that with other patients where they said, my wife is in the corner. I see her. She's right there. She's coming to get me, like I've had those. So many of the times when we see these visions, it's just a sign that we see, or we ask the family, have they been seeing these things? Are they saying it's kind of like, are they having irregular breathing? How has their blood pressure been? Are they seeing dead people? It's like a symptom of dying in a way. So after a while, it's like, I don't know. It's always profound, but it's less, I don't know, Julie.
Oh, no, that's exactly how I was going to say it too, Penny. Like, so to me, what's most fascinating about it, and what I found, is that like how often it happens. And like I can't say whether, I really don't care what it is, but what I like to, like, so it's like, I don't care, like, do you believe in it or not? It's like, I believe in it. I know that it's not the things people think it is, right? It's not oxygen or the brain being deprived of oxygen. It's not because of medications. It's not delirium. That looks much different. Like I can say that this visioning thing that we see in a lot of hospice patients is its own thing. I do know that. It's not like, I really don't think it's because of medications or because of, well, it's definitely not because of the oxygen to the brain, because most of the time they're alert and oriented and their oxygen's fine. So it's more of like, I know what it's not, but I don't know what it is. And to me, it happens just often enough that it's like, it's kind of commonplace, and it's not about us, right, as hospice workers. So I would think it'd be very strange for a hospice nurse to be like, tell me more. What is it? When did they die?
Yes.
Like
yeah.
that's weird. Like nurses shouldn't be doing that, right? Like this is more of like, it's not about us. It's about their experience, about the family's experience. And yes, I've seen people visioning, and it's, of course, like Penny said, it's always amazing, but I'm not going to like interrupt that to like get a good story about someone visioning. You know what I mean? It's more
exactly.
like, just observe, and it's more surprising to me how often you observe it. And really, if you don't observe it, a lot of my stories come secondhand from family members, because they're worried. Like, I don't necessarily see someone visioning, but the family will say, hey, I'm getting worried because he keeps talking to his dead dad, and then that's where you do the education. So yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So an example of that for me is, and that's one of the things I asked as a hospice case manager, or even when I worked in facilities, which it was more evident then because you would see them doing it. But like as a case manager, I would ask my patients, have you been seeing anything out of the ordinary? Because it is a sign to us that people are approaching the end of their life. It can happen 2-3 weeks before their death. Like Julie said, they can be completely cognizant and verbal. They're not taking medications. And so it's a question I would ask, but I wouldn't dive into what they were talking about. So like one of my patients, I knew she was failing. She always still wanted to sit at the kitchen table with me, and she would barely make it in there. She had lung cancer. And I asked her one day, have you been seeing anything out of the ordinary? And she said, like what? And I said, well, like visions of maybe dead people that aren't here anymore. And she said, oh, no, nothing like that. And I said, oh, okay, because that's normal. And she said, it is? And I said, yes, that's normal. We see that all the time. And she goes, oh, well, then I'll tell you, my dad is standing in the kitchen.
Oh my
and I was like, oh, okay. And that was it. I didn't say, what does he look like? What is he wearing? Did he say anything to you? How does he look? Is he young? Is he old? Like I just said, oh, okay. Like, great. Validated her that she saw him. I also feel like if we start pressuring them about what they're seeing, it may feel invalidating in a way, like we don't believe what they're telling us. But I also have had the same situation as Julie, where people have called me and said, hey, I think they need some medication. They're seeing things, well, what kind of things are they seeing? Well, she keeps saying her cat is in the room and her cat's dead, died 20 years ago. Oh, okay. Well, that's really normal. It's comforting to them. We don't need to medicate that away. It's normal. But I love the way you put it, Julie. Like it's not our experience, it's their experience. And we're assessing for that experience so we know where they're at in their dying process. But that's the extent right there. We don't need to play into it. We don't need to, like if they say, I'm looking for my cat, well, let me help you find it. We don't need to do that. We just accept
and
them
obviously you're
for where they're at with
too,
it.
She obviously saw someone, her father, and then needed you to validate it, and that was all you had to do, and that was it. And then you played your role perfectly. Damn, hospice is just profound. I mean, I know I spoke to you all already, but every time I speak to you two, it's just I don't know. You guys cover so many different aspects of life, and it's making me think of. I just had a episode. I'll get you two out of here soon. And I spoke to this guy, Uncle Jack. He's 100 years old, and so just related to me in regards to you speaking to people that are on their deathbed and at the end of their life. Where I don't know how personal you two get with your patients. I'm sure it varies maybe from patient to patient. And not to put you on the spot, but I'm putting you on the spot with if there's anything you recollect in regards to patients that have been the most profound to you, whether it was just something about the way they lived their life or anything that stood out to you just orally with their words?
Most of the time I see, I actually did a video one time calling out somebody who said, if I would have known, if they would have told me in nursing school how many people make deathbed confessions, I would have thought twice about being a nurse. And I was like, I've never heard a deathbed confession because I'm not a chaplain. I'm a nurse. That's not my role. I'm not there to get their confessions. I think for me, I mostly hear about my patients' lives from their families. Usually when the person is dying, that's when the family starts to reminisce and they talk about their person, and I hear these things about them. And, and I can't think of anything that really I can recall patients that I've had where, oh, she was a nurse at Harborview, or, she was an amazing photographer and there's all these pictures of Africa in the room and, little things like that. But I can't think of anything that was so incredibly out of the ordinary that it stayed with me. I remember lots of my patients and how the family loved that person and told me the special things about them. But I never wrote them down. And I never heard any deathbed confessions or anything like that. So, yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say, definitely a few patients like stand out in my mind where I can like visually picture them and their families and things about them, and probably stood out because of our connection. You're not close with like, of course, like you take care of all of your patients, but certain patients you like click with more, the families you click with more, or they live longer, so you're there more often, or they have more issues, so you're there more often. It just depends. And there's certain patients that stand out in that way to me, just in a special way because of having to care for them. And I would say mostly the ones that really stand out that I like to tell stories about are like the like what I was mentioning earlier with like the love. Like there's a family right now I can think of. I don't know the patient's name. I saw them twice, but like I will forever remember this story because it was so profound in the sense of like I went to go visit him and he quickly changed on a dime. Like he was dying, but he wasn't like actively dying. But for some reason, whatever happened in that visit, he went to actively dying. And that could have turned into panic fest. Like all the family was there, like they could have freaked out and not been in the moment. But for some reason, they were able to take what I was saying and just turn to what needed to be done, which was nothing, and just be there with their loved one, saying everything they wanted to say, surrounding this person with love, like a big cocoon of love. And it profoundly changed me to be able, and I'm like, I want to be like that. I want to be able to switch into this mode of like, we did not know he was going to die today, and now he is. And he died there with me there. And the family was all around, and there's no wrong or right way to grieve, right? But like, but to be able to do that and to switch on a dime, like things like that, like I have multiple stories like that, right? With different people. And those are the things that I remember and the people that I remember, even if I don't remember their names. I remember like the feelings that we all felt, the fact that I was there when he took his last breath and everyone was so amazing in that moment. It really transformed the whole moment.
I don't know how you do
it. It was
it.
amazing. So things like that.
I'm just a podcast host.
Death is the great equalizer.
Yeah.
I'm thinking about how, like I've taken care of famous people. I didn't even think of that until, I was listening to Julie talking about the love and the family and everything like that, and thinking about how, I've taken care of famous people, and I've taken care of people who were nobody, like nobody special. And the ones that stand out to me are the ones who had families that just really cared for them.
Is powerful. I mean, and how everyone reacts.
Definitely.
It's I don't know. To me, again, I don't know anything about your field besides the times we've spoken, and you two have taught me a lot. But again, that the balancing of handling all that and separating it professionally and then not taking it home from work, it's just it's admirable how the heck you guys do it.
Well,
Penny and I were just talking about that. Penny
you can't do this work if you're someone who is going to take it home with you. You have to disconnect. You have to. Yeah. And Julie's right. We were just talking about this. You have to turn it off, man. You can't, for me, it's like professional boundaries are really important in nursing and healthcare, period. But emotional boundaries are especially important in hospice. Yes. And I've always been pretty good about maintaining my emotional boundaries. Like it's not my family. That's not my person who's dying. That's not my family. And I can care for them and I can care about them and I can be sad when they die, but it can't overwhelm me to the point where I can't do the work anymore.
Right.
You have to be able to separate, disconnect.
And this might sound a little harsh, and it cut me because it is. Like, I think you can't make it about you. It's not about your sadness. It's not about like, I can't do it. And if you can't do that,
right,
then like, you're not going to be a good hospice nurse, because you really have to, like Penny said, have good emotional boundaries in order to care for someone well. Otherwise, it does kind of turn into like, oh my God, it's just so sad, And I'll be honest, I mean, very rarely do I come home super affected by the day. If I'm ever affected, it's always a positive. It's always like, that was amazing what I just witnessed. I'm so grateful for my job. Except in a few instances where it can get me. And I was just that's what Penny and I were talking about, which I won't go into the whole story, but basically there's certain situations where I can feel a little helpless, where I feel like I can't do enough or there's not enough to be done. And I do. There's something about that really can get to me. And then it's like night and day, you guys. It's like once I cross that boundary, it's almost like I can't function. It's like, it breaks me. Like I'm out for the day. Like I have to go home. I have to like cry. I have to be in a dark room. I have to eat Jersey Mike's. Like I can't do it, you know? And it's so funny because, I could see how if someone felt that way every day, of course they couldn't do this job, but I just so very rarely do. And I will say there is something in me that probably was taught a little bit over the years that I can kind of switch it off. Like I can feel all those things, but then at the end of the day, I can kind of be like, okay, enough's enough, switch. And it's just, I don't know if it's good or bad or what that is, but I can do it.
Yeah, well, I can do it too.
Yeah, Penny we can do it. Yeah.
Yeah. I had one that was so overwhelming, and it was a long case. It was a hard case. It was a young man. It was just overwhelming, and I ended up just we went on vacation, and I kept watching the death list, and he was never on it. And I finally was like, I can't go back to work because I cannot go see him again. I can't do it. And I had to call in sick so that I wouldn't see him. And then he did finally die. And I was like, I need a mental health day because I can't literally cannot go see this man again. I said goodbye to him. We said our goodbyes. It's over. It's done. I cannot see him one more time. And I called in sick. And that's the really the one time that I think was the most significantly overwhelming for me, to where I was just like, no, I got to call in sick for that one.
And Penny, this is the last thing I'll say, Dave, because I can get on my soapbox with this. Penny, that's like exactly what you should do. Like,
yes,
that is what good boundaries in nursing is. Perfect example of that. We don't self-sacrifice because we think we should, or like we set these boundaries. This is what I can do. This is what I can't do. I need a mental health day. I can't do it. And that is a perfect example of when we talk about boundaries. That's a perfect example. Great boundaries.
Yeah, I would rarely even go to funerals for my patients because I was like, nope, I have a life. Especially when I worked in a hospice care center, like I would be going to funerals on all of my time off if I chose to do that. And so I went to two, and I've cared for thousands of dying patients, literally thousands of dying people, but I've been to two funerals, and one of them was my husband's great aunt who happened to be at our hospice care center. So it was like, can't do it. Got to draw a line there. If you're a nurse, if you're a hospice nurse, and you're doing things like telling after hours that you want them to give you a call when the patient dies, no matter what time it is, and I see this all the time, nurses who keep their work phone on after hours, after their business hours, they keep their work phone on just in case they call. I'm just like, no, you have a team of. For one thing, it's a little bit arrogant to think that none of your colleagues can take care of your patients if you're not there.
Right.
But you work these hours, these are the hours you work. And when you're not working, there's somebody else that's going to pick up and take over for your patient when they need you.
Literally, so you have to do that. Like, you have to do that. Oh my God. See, you didn't know what you got into with it. Like, to me, it's inappropriate. Like, I think it's inappropriate if you don't do that. I think it's inappropriate. You cannot be the end all be all for this one family. You can't. And if that's the role you want to play, good luck surviving in nursing for a long period of time. You won't. Oh, I could go on and on.
Julie's.
Yeah. I mean, my agency.
We're taught to be these martyrs.
Yes.
We're taught that if you don't do that, you're not a good nurse. You're not caring. That's bullshit. Anyway.
Yeah. The expectation of overtime for nurses is ridiculous.
Yeah.
Yeah. I forgot what I was going to say. I don't
know, but I feel like we just launched your both your podcasts just on Dead Talks right now. the Penny and Julie show right now. I love it.
Talking about nursing and boundaries. Yeah.
Don't think we haven't heard that before.
No, I'm happy. I'm happy you guys just talked about that, because Max or Jeff edit everything I'm saying. The fact that you brought that up is important, because it's a different angle of the conversation, that there's thousands and thousands and thousands of nurses out there, I'm sure, feel the exact same way. And And in contrast to the patients who expect certain things from you, but at the end of the day, you two are going to work. You guys are going to work. You have a specific job, just like any other job has a specific mission to accomplish. And as you're explaining it, your mission is very specific and doesn't always come with all these other things that have emotional ties.
I always tell nurses, you have to remember at the end of the day, this is your job. This is your workplace. This is your job. You wouldn't like be a cashier at a grocery store and then go home and relive all of that. You're not going to scan all your food in your kitchen so you can relive what your day was like as a grocery checker. It's your job. And I've been fortunate that my agency, that I worked at as a home hospice case manager, it's the policy that we do not have communication with our families after the patient dies. Our grief support services, like we can call them and debrief with them because people like that. Like people like it when you call and you say, how did it go? They like to kind of debrief about it. But beyond that, our grief support services department takes over. But I know there are agencies that don't have that kind of a policy. And that's a slippery slope when you develop a relationship with a family and the patient dies and then the relationship is ongoing. There could be some conflict of interest there. And so it's just another boundary issue, to be getting involved with your patients' families after the person dies. Your job is done. You gotta go take care of the other ones now.
Before I do a pitch of a GoFundMe for Julie's internet, because it's god awful right now, outside of that.
I know you're in.
I have really good
I'm in the fucking mountains, Julie.
You guys, I spend a shit ton of money on really good internet.
Now you're like making out with the camera lens. You're very close.
It's not. We can now, but
you've been so choppy. And that's what I thought. I was like, isn't Penny in East Bumblefuck? And I can see her and talk to her
choppy
right now.
Yeah, I'm in bumfuck with the Starlink. Yeah.
How do you guys know it's not your internet?
Well, we can see each other fine. You're all pixelated.
Well,
I look at you guys. You're pixelated, so maybe it is mine.
That's normalizing to clear up. The back end will actually be clear, but you've been very laggy. But anyway, nevertheless, I'm sure that's great, Julie. I wanted to ask one last question.
Hold on, but listen, Max and Jeff, who are going to watch this. If you're watching, I'm going to stare at my camera. You said I bought the good internet, and then I have good internet.
For anyone listening, Max,
what happened?
They told me mine is shitty, and they're right because it took 24 hours to download or to upload 8 videos to their Dropbox.
We have the same individual teams behind the scenes of what we're all doing. So Max and Jeff are. That's pretty. You know who Max and Jeff are, by the way. They're handling a lot of the back end stuff for all of us, actually, which is pretty amazing. Extra sauce. Plug in extra sauce.
Gives us a sauce.
But speaking of them, Max wanted me to ask one question to both of you, which apparently is a meme. Before we get out of here, it's a meme that what is the difference between palliative care and hospice care? Is that true? That's a meme.
A meme.
What's the meme? Is someone going like I don't know.
I guess so. He said, it's a popular question I hear all the time. Like, how would you describe it? What is the biggest difference between the two?
No,
it is a popular question. Yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty much the same. There's just a few differences. You have to be terminally ill with a life expectancy of 6 months or less to be on hospice, and you don't have to have that terminality with palliative care. And you can't seek treatment when you're on hospice for your terminal condition. You can on palliative care. Those are kind of the two big differences. Julie, you do palliative care admissions and hospice admissions, so you're even more of an authority on it than I am.
Really? I mean, I think it's the reason why it's a meme and people never know is because I think so hospice is federally funded, so every hospice should basically be the same and have the same criteria. Palliative care is very much funded by Medicare and Medi-Cal, but also insurance companies. So it can kind of vary from hospital to hospital, agency to agency. Like one agency I worked for, we'd only see palliative care patients once a month, and they didn't have 24-hour number to call. And there was different criteria to be on palliative care. And now this agency that I work for is very different. We see our palliative care patients once a week. They have a 24-hour number they can call. There's different criteria to meet to be on palliative. So I think that's why it can be confusing, because it does vary from agency to agency. But like Penny said, in general, I always say palliative care is usually like you have a life-limiting illness, whether it's terminal or not, is it's maybe too early to tell, or you're still doing treatment to hopefully have it not be terminal. And then it's a symptom management program. So we're managing the symptoms of either the disease or the treatment you have for the disease is making you sick. So we're kind of like managing those symptoms from that disease.
It's apparently a
treatment.
So thank you for both your explanation.
You know what I mean? I feel like it's such a, people always want to know, but then the explanation is so long-winded and boring. I'm like, do you guys
people
really?
Ask me, that is like the most asked question when I do a live.
Yeah.
To the point where my moderators will now like be typing in the comments. She has a pinned, it's pinned in her, what are those lists called on our TikToks? You know, they're like, it's pinned, go look at it.
Yeah.
Because I mean, I just answer that question over and over and over and over again. And I'm sick of answering it because it's not that exciting. It's not an exciting question to answer. It's boring. It's like hospice regs.
My understanding is just saying, okay, hospice dying, palliative might be dying. Okay.
That's kind of a good way to sum it up, but also,
I mean,
hospice
hard
treatment, hospice, no treatment, palliative care treatment. Okay. They're pursuing two pathways.
Yeah.
On the healthcare continuum, somebody explained the healthcare continuum to me in a drawing once, and it was really cool the way she wrote it, because she wrote it like you start off with being like, it's all curative healthcare, you know, maintaining your health. And then you've got palliative care as like a sliver. And then this gets bigger, bigger, bigger towards the end as this gets smaller, as people go towards palliative care. And then there's a cutoff, and then there's hospice. And it's not a good model at all. It should be different than that. Hospice and palliative should be incorporated more into I think people on hospice should sometimes be able to pursue curative. And I also think they should have a longer life expectancy than 6 months or less, but I'm not fucking Medicare, so I don't get to make the rules. But I think the fact that it's a 6 month or less, and people are so reticent to go on hospice because of the association with, you go on hospice and you die, and they think that hospice causes death, and it doesn't. That we get people with a really short length of stay, and it's really unfortunate, because there's a lot that hospice can do for people if we're given the opportunity. But when somebody comes onto service and they're actively dying, or they die in a week or two, they don't even get to take advantage of the program. Okay. So that's kind of a bummer.
We've already gone past the time that I thought we would be. So I just want to thank you two for being on. Y'all two are amazing. I feel like we can just do this forever, to be honest. Looking forward to YouTube. I'm looking, that was on purpose. That one was on purpose.
Y'all too.
That one was on purpose. But before we do go out of here, I think I'm pretty confident we can get this out in time. Today is what? August, whatever. We're going to get this out hopefully next week. So if you're listening to the past or future, I don't know what's going on, but please let everyone know about what you two have going on and regarding the retreat or this, that, and the other.
Yes. Well, Penny and I are doing an in-person retreat this September 15th through the 17th in North Carolina, Boone, North Carolina, to be specific. So it is last minute, but it's kind of like, hey, if you're hearing this and you're feeling called to come, anyone is welcome. It's a full weekend. It will be fun, despite us saying we're talking about death. But no, I mean, Penny and I it's going to be educational. It's going to be a weekend of connecting, a weekend of, there's meditation, there's yoga in between our sessions at this wonderful retreat center, and a lot of education. And it's just going to be, I'm so excited, Penny. I'm so excited. It's our first
prizes.
And prizes. That's right.
Gifts. We got all kinds of gifts. My daughter is receiving the gifts for us because she lives in North Carolina. So we're having them shipped to her. And she told me today, Mom, there are so many boxes here for you. There's all kinds of great, really, really quality Oprah Winfrey style gifts, great gifts. So yeah, it's going to be really fun. It's going to be amazing. We're really looking forward to it. It's going to be small, and intimate and really educational, informative. It's just really great. So, and also both of us are on all of the socials, of course, YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, Hospice Nurse Penny and Hospice Nurse Julie. So we can be found on our socials.
And if you want the link to the link to the retreat can be found on our socials, or you can go to hospicenursejulie.com. And when you go there, it'll pop up information for the actual retreat, all the information, and what you need to know.
Send me the link again. I can just find it, I guess, like you just promoted. And I'll promote it myself. And also I'll put it in the description for anyone listening. And of course, all their socials, you can find both of them. Any event with you two together, let alone individually, I'd pay money to go see. So I'm not getting any royalties for anything I'm promoting right now. Just so you know, these two are just two wonderful women. I'll support them to the end. So I want to thank you two so much for taking the time to be on here. And until next time, another episode of Dead Talks with Hospice Nurse Julie and Hospice Nurse Penny. Thank you all. See you next time. Thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of Dead Talks. Please do not forget to hit the subscribe button and also the notification bell. That'll give you updates as to when we post a new video, more episodes, and more content in general. We are streaming on all the major podcast platforms, including Apple, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Pandora, and all that. And also find us on Instagram at Dead Talks Podcast or www.deadtalks.net. Thank you so much.